Hello everyone, my name is Dairukasutane, and I am what you kids nowadays would refer to as a Dusty. What can I say? It is hard to make a good living out there in the world these days, and hard work alone is not enough to bring you any closer to the finish line of success. Make no mistake, I am making no excuses for the many mistakes I have made early on in my life, but do you know where money is not a problem? Victoria 3. It seems in the most recent few hotfixes, debt has become such a simple problem to overcome that it is not even worth noticing anymore. Now, allow me a chance to explain myself with a quick example. Let's say you have 400 million in credit and you end up losing 5 million per tick. You will eventually, after about 80 ticks, end up over the debt limit. However, strangely enough, with the way the game is currently set up, going over the debt limit is hard capped after a certain point. For the sake of brevity, we're going to say 405 million is going to be the hard cap in this example. You do not accrue any more debt after this certain point. Instead, what happens is your government construction is forcefully paused and you begin to be penalized with a growing penalty that caps out at minus 50% offense, minus 50% defense, and minus 50% throughput for all of your buildings. I mean, that does sound pretty bad, right? Especially with those opium war-like penalties that will almost guarantee that you will lose every war that you end up in. Well, up to a certain point. If you end up in a debt spiral and cross this threshold in the middle of a war in the early game, you will likely lose that war. Of course, it probably won't be the end of the game. You'll lose a few war goals and it will definitely hurt, but if it is in the early game and you won't end up conquered or puppeted, you'll probably recover. In the end game, however, when cut-down wars are happening, chances are you already have chemical warfare, squad infantry, siege artillery, flamethrowers, and stormtroopers, maybe even planes. You wouldn't probably be crossing the 100 infamy threshold unless you had a sizable tech advantage over everybody else, right? Well, it seems that the Opium War style penalties aren't enough to cause you to lose anything with those previous bonuses. I mean, it's actually possible to completely ignore those penalties entirely and still hand Great Britain, France, and Russia their collective posteriors without even breaking a sweat. That is how big technology advantages are in Victoria 3. Of course, looking at that horrible minus 50% throughput penalty, you clearly would be reeling after that. I mean, debt begets debt, and you'll never be able to recover when your entire country is now as half productive as it used to be. You might be able to ignore those horrible offensive and defensive penalties, but you won't ever be able to recover without clicking that bankruptcy button, right? Well, there is a funny thing about the throughput penalty. It has a nasty habit of reducing the GDP of your country as your buildings start going broke. This also has the byproduct of reducing the amount of credit that you have on hand, which we've already established has a hard cap on how much debt you can have going over this credit limit. So instead of 400 million credit and 405 million debt, you now have 300 million credit and 305 million debt. Wait, did you just lose 100 million debt by effectively losing GDP? You flippin' did, and here is the real kicker. By reducing your taxation to very low, you can effectively cause this to happen even faster, while at the same time actually increasing the standard of living of your people. You can't lose any more debt than you already have, so there's no point in caring about this, right? Now you can reduce your expenses, and I do mean every single expense. Get rid of every subsidy, every subvention, then switch to very heavy taxes. Throw on every consumption tax that you can do, and do this until you start making money again. Or, easier yet, just go out and actively conquer another state to increase the credit limit over your current debt. Doing either of those things will likely put your debt below your credit limit. We'll say for this example, you go down to 299 million debt below the 300 million credit line. Suddenly, that 50% throughput penalty as well as the minus 50% combat penalties are gone. And I do mean instantly. It might be a rolling penalty when you get it, but it disappears the moment you're no longer in Greek debt. Now, with your buildings no longer suffering from a minus 50% throughput penalty, they all skyrocket in value. That 300 million credit, it now skyrockets back to 400 million, yet your debt is still 299 million. You now have a buffer of 100 million before your next debt crisis. Surely there are some long-term ramifications for doing something like this, right? Well, no. You might lose a few dozen buildings due to the productivity drop in the time it takes you to fix your debt crisis. However, if you're sitting on even a few thousand construction by this time, you won't only not notice, you'll probably just be happy to have things to build to maintain your construction cycle. What about any other problem? Nope. None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Congratulations, you've effectively solved your country's debt crisis by clicking a few buttons or conquering a neighboring state. You've done something that politicians across the world could only wish that they could do. You've effectively made yourself the real Federal Reserve of Victoria 3. Does this mean debt is worthless? And in the current patch of 198, there is literally zero reason to give a crap about it, so long as you don't end up in a war during the penalty phase? Yes, that is precisely what I'm saying. This is the ultimate exploit among exploits, and I absolutely hate it. Maybe you could make this into a joke, or even an argument about the fact that this is actually very realistic, since that's pretty much what the debt ceiling is in reality. Maybe the more serious-minded of you will give me a lecture about fractional reserve banking and explain that real-life money has no actual value beyond our imaginations. Yet, this is a game-breaking bug. It is the type of bug that has the capacity to completely throw the delicate balance of our lovely little economy simulator entirely out of whack. The moment somebody decides to make a meta out of this in some Podok multiplayer game, who's going to be able to stop it? How can you even police something like this? How can you even watch other players as they do something like this? There's no way. Once more, I find myself on a soapbox pontificating to people, pretending as if I am smart enough to know the right path towards fixing a very severe problem. I am telling you people right now, I am an idiot. I am not very smart. I'm very bad at math beyond basic multiplication and division. I am not the way forward. However, once again, I have to state, something desperately needs to change. Why does there have to be a cap on debt? Why is the cap on debt so low in the first place? Why not just let it go until infinity? Or, at the very least, double the current credit limit as the cap. Make it actually difficult to pull off an exploit like this, because this exploit was happening automatically for me in my most recent game of Ladakh. I was exploiting by accident. That is how easy it was to do. You can offset the damage an unlimited cap causes by making the debt disappear when you click the bankruptcy button, and only the credit limit is actually paid back by the system. Once more, this could be easily exploited, but the penalties of bankruptcy will more than make up for that fact, unlike the penalties of the debt limit. Another thing, why does the penalty disappear the moment your debt does? Why is the penalty for debt capped at 50? Why isn't it 100? I shouldn't be able to win any wars at all when I'm in debt. In fact, the number of radicals should be increasing exponentially. My country should be split in half the moment I even touch that debt ceiling. The punishment is far too light, and it makes the exploits like this possible in the first place. I don't know. My ideas are just me shooting from the hip anyways. I didn't give them any real thought. So I'm certain somebody smarter than me could come up with a far better solution. However, this is still a problem that absolutely needs a solution.